Hello, Wildcats, and thank you for joining us. This is the Word to the Wildcat podcast. My name is Tommy Fernandez. My personal pronouns are he, him, his, or my name, and I'm an ITAM major here at Central. And joining me, as always, is Aurelie.
What's up, Wildcats? My name is Arely Ruiz. My pronouns are she, her, ellas. I am an elementary education major here at Central Washington University. And this is episode 3 of season 3. And today's theme is professional management.
And with that being said, we are very excited to have Michael Middleton joining us today. He graduated from the University of Mary, Washington, and is now currently working at CWU in student involvement as an engagement coordinator. So, and a little side note, he also is just recently joined the CLC office. So it's been great having you, Michael, and welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, y'all.
Oh yeah, for sure. So diving straight into professional management, I actually earlier tried to look up like a simple definition of the term, and I kind of had difficulty. And I just think that's because there's so many different aspects. You know, you have your time management, your personal development skills. And so I kind of just wanted to get everyone's kind of view of what professionalism means to them, because I can have my own individual view, but Michael, yours can be different. Aurelie's, yours can be different. So let's go around and kind of see what is your view on professionalism.
So I like that you kind of looked up a definition and you had trouble finding it, because I feel like it is such a broad, overarching kind of thing. For me, it's how I show up in a specific space, and it's also contextual. So anything from, like you were mentioning, timeliness to open communication to, hey, I said that I'm going to do this thing, and if I can't do it, I'm communicating, hey, this is what's going on, or I'm making sure that it's done on time. And it's also how you physically show up in a space for me as well. So are you going into a context that matches the professional world in which you're in? And I say that in that weird kind of way, because if I'm a professional basketball player and I'm going to play, then it makes sense for me to show up in my jersey, my uniform, my athletic wear. That's professional, but that might be a little bit different in, your typical office setting.
I actually never thought of it that way, and that makes so much sense. Just because for me, my idea of professional development, professionalism has shifted over the years, just because I used to think that individual with the title, the CEO, always wearing business clothing, got the nice expensive suit on, or has like that mentality in which you always have to keep grinding no matter how tired you are. That was my old definition of professionalism. But now that I have grown as a professional myself, and like Michael was mentioning, it just depends on who you are, what you're actually trying to accomplish in that moment, in that setting. But professionalism definitely is something that shows up in different ways for different people, just given the context. So I really appreciate that you gave that example, because that blew my mind. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and one thing for me too is being a professional is, of course, showing up on time, but also being prepared for the moment. Coming into this meeting, I'm not just gonna, try to wing it, and that feeling when you're giving a presentation, you might not really know what you're trying to say. Yeah, that's always the worst. So just coming in prepared and being ready for the moment, that's something I think really takes to be a professionalism. And now, Michael, kind of going into some of your background, what are some of the things you had to experience and learn going through college, grad school, and now into your career, focusing around your ability to be a professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I had a good interaction over the course of my journey through undergrad into grad school into a professional position with my development with professionalism. And part of that goes back to how I kind of got involved at first on campus. So my first big involvement was with a campus club called UMW Breakers. And that's the club that's all around hip hop and breaking culture. So being in that space, there are definitely folks who had certain preconceived notions about who we are, how we operate, and what we kind of stand for. And we fortunately didn't have, any direct very traumatic altercations or things like that, but we would have like, oh, we've reserved a spot outside to practice, and we would get the occasional faculty or staff member coming up to us saying, oh, are y'all supposed to be here? Like, are you students here? Kind of questioning what we're doing because of the connotation of hip hop. So that was a very interesting piece because it allowed me to also bridge the gap with people and kind of serve as an example to say, hey, just because you have a certain interest doesn't mean that that defines who you are and how you operate as a person. And we were able to kind of establish a professional presence as a club on campus. So we had departments that would ask us to perform at their big events that they had going on. We always performed every year at the Multicultural Fair, which is this all-day huge event that takes over all of campus. We were always performing at different club events and things like that. And part of the reason that we were able to do that is because we operated in a very professional manner, being upfront with people. This is what we're doing. This is the music that we're going to bring, showing them the music beforehand. Hey, this is an event where we don't want any cursing or anything like that. So we're going to make sure that that's clear. All this stuff that goes into the package and the image of what Breakers was. And then that for me translated directly into my working career because my involvement with this club put me into the recreation center because that's where the studios were, and connected me with my first on-campus job, which was at the recreation center. So then I'm working, but also kind of showing up in a different way because I still have to go into the recreation center dressed for practice when it's club time, but I also have to go into the recreation center dressed as an employee when it's work time. And so you're kind of teetering this balance of making sure that I am presenting myself in a way that I feel comfortable kind of owning. And I think it goes back to that. Do you, at the end of the day, feel comfortable with how you presented yourself in the spaces that you're interacting with? And that means like, hey, folks who I'm bringing into this club, as I eventually moved up into a leadership position in the club, I can't have you running through the halls and disrespecting equipment or doing all kinds of, hey, we're going to use the speakers that are for the group fitness classes, but we're not allowed to use them. It was very much being able to say, this is how we operate as a group on campus. And this is how I need you all to make sure that you're operating in order for us to uphold our professional status. After that, I moved into a graduate assistant position, a graduate assistant role on campus. So I had graduated from undergrad. I had taken a position with the university to serve as a graduate assistant in the Office of Student Activities and Engagement. So that's essentially doing clubs and org development, student development, and campus activities. It's one office where we were. And that was a really, really cool experience. We had all kinds of different events that were going on campus, from huge, large concerts. We had T-Pain at one point. We had Drum and Waka Flocka at one point. We had We the Kings. It was a really, really cool experience in that regard as well, because that entertainment side of things usually brings, oh, this is really cool. This is really hype. As students, and me working as a professional, as students, we're going to pregame before we go to this concert that the school is putting on. And so having to then manage my peers and say, hey, you are clearly intoxicated. You can't come into this space. And these rules were up front when you bought the tickets and things like that. All of that kind of influenced how I was able to shape my professional self.
I love that you just shared how, like, the exact timeline. I feel like it really helps give our audience an idea that you are one of many individuals that have like a multifaceted way of showing up as a professional. And I remember you mentioned when we were on a call before, your small business, the Jacks of All, correct?
Yeah,
I think this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about that really quick, because I do want to learn more a little bit about what you do in terms of your small business, and maybe if it connects to professionalism, how do you view it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, Jacks of All is a company slash brand that I started with my partner and business partner, one of our very close friends from college. The company itself is really centered around the core mission of growth, development, and engagement with personal passions. So anything that it is that you go out of your way to do just because you love it or just because it makes you feel good. For me, that's a lot of dance and music and creative stuff, but we like to celebrate folks who are doing culinary arts, folks who are doing physical training. We have a lot of power lifters that we uplift and support, folks who are drawing. So really coming into that jack of all trades mentality. And the other piece of it is that the focus is not necessarily to be the best, although you very well may be shooting for that, but you don't have to be the best in order to engage with something that you love or something that you enjoy. And as long as it's bringing you that joy, then you definitely want to make that a priority in your life. So for the company itself, we have a social media presence on Instagram and Facebook mainly right now, and a website, jacksofall.com, hashtag not sponsored. Um, for our website, we just had our first merch run. So we made 4 different types of stickers and a t-shirt run of the same design in 3 different formats. So there was a black shirt, a white, and 2 white shirts with different colored designs of the same design on it. And that happened. We had pre-orders open for about a month. And actually this morning, bright and early, we had the shirts produced, sent over here. We did all the quality control stuff to make sure there was like no stains, no bad debris, everything's in good condition, packaged them up, and I dropped those off at the UPS store. So they're on their way out to people right now. So that's been pretty cool. We also, and I love that y'all are doing this because we also are starting a podcast that's associated with Jacks of All. So we're recording some episodes and kind of getting them backlogged before we release them so that we can get them all done and then kind of take a breath, because all 3 of us are still working as full-time folks in our various industries as well as doing this business. So I'm very excited for it. We have been rolling for about 6 months now. A lot of that was doing the foundational business sort of thing. So we registered our LLC in Washington State. We got our business license, make sure all of our tax stuff is in order. We went through and we opened up a business bank account so we can better track all of our expenses. We ordered the supplies we will need to print. So we have a thermal printer to print labels for shipping. So it's been a really, really cool adventure.
I love to hear that. Personally, I wouldn't have thought that all of that goes into I never even heard of a thermal printer. I don't even know what that is. But I'm very excited and I'm really happy that you're starting this journey. I look forward to listening to your podcast and maybe even looking up your website. Not maybe, I will be looking up your website, just saying. But yeah, in terms of like building the foundation of like even just your small business, I know that there's a lot of background in terms of how you show up and how you learned. I would really appreciate knowing a little bit more of like, what was your initial like learning moment that kind of like showed up in terms of like professionalism?
Mm-hmm. Specifically for the small business or kind of overall?
I'm thinking a little bit more of overall, just because you shared so much about your background in school. And then, I mean, either or, I'm interested in learning more.
Yeah, well, and I would love to actually ask you all the same question after I kind of explore a little bit. I think for me, it kind of goes back to family. Both of my parents were or are very, very keyed into kind of that professional world and how you show up, especially as Black folk in society. My father just turned 74, so he's a little bit older. And my mother was born in 1964. So they had been around in South Carolina, so in our lovely South, for a lot of racism and a lot of scrutiny over the professionalism of Black people. And so they had overcome a lot. They have done a huge, huge amount in their lives. And I can attribute, I think, a lot of my energy as it relates to business and trying to grow and develop as a person to my mother, who is also running her own business, both in a printing copy package delivery shop, but also she is a franchisee of Kumon. So she runs her own Kumon Center, and she had worked in daycare and early education for the rest of her life previously to that. So a lot of my grind comes from her, but they always were instilling in us to be cognizant of how you're appearing, especially as it relates to your identity, because some folks will be taking, or if some folks will have certain ideas of who you are and how you show up based on that. So I think one of the things that I think about, kind of going back to hip hop, is that if I'm dressed to go practice and to go break, I'm probably in sweatpants, I might be in a windbreaker, a beanie, or something like that. And I can feel this energy a little bit. Me showing up in that space in certain areas, even if it's just like going to a grocery store, I can kind of feel an energy difference between me if I just gotten off of work and I'm in my work attire and going into those spaces. And it's not necessarily negative and it's not necessarily malicious, but I do think that people will kind of default to some things that are just instilled in us as people.
Yeah.
And one of those things, I think, around college that I started to really think about mentally was whether or not I'm wearing, or I'm dressing for practice, or I'm dressing for a job interview, or I'm dressing casually for Sunday, none of my credentials have changed. I still have an undergrad, I still have a master's, I'm still a working professional, but it is interesting how people might think or be surprised. Oh, you went to grad school and you're in, your practice wear, when you're presenting in that certain way. So I think for me, it's kind of been a lifelong thing that I've kind of gotten instilled in me since I can remember. And I'm curious what your experiences have been.
Yeah, I would say, like, for me, I am lucky where I never had to be put in a situation of worrying about, let's say, my skin tone, to like have to deal with facing the challenges you have may face. But like my parents gave me kind of like the basic advice of, show up to work on time, be respectful, do your job duty, get in, get out. But then kind of going to Central and kind of doing more workshops focusing on professional management, I learned all about just the idea of just managing your time and keeping, as you said earlier, that balance in your life, and kind of making sure not to, apply yourself to too many things, and making sure they can show up for what you sign up for. And so that's been one of my biggest challenges coming here, being a student and also working, is spreading my time around and making sure that I'm applying myself professionally as a student for the purpose of my career, but also my time here working at the CLCE, making sure that I'm doing my best for what our goal and what our mission is at the center.
I think mine comes from a little bit kind of like, to mesh y'all's together. It's been a lifelong journey, and I'm still continuing to learn that, just because my idea of professionalism has changed to be more authentic and trying to be more myself and how I show up as a professional. But definitely started once I got here to Central, just because I am very fortunate enough to show up in a space where I have Latinx community, and a lot of them share my similar background. But once I leave my spaces, or if I leave like a safe space, my professionalism doesn't show up the same. I have to change my voice, or I have to be a certain way just because I am a woman of color. Well, I don't have to. It's just certain people would like to see me in this type of stereotypical vision of what they see me as a professional, but I'm learning to adjust that. But for the most part, for me, my biggest learning experience as a professional was probably meeting Doctora Flores, her being my mentor and all. She is fabulous. She is amazing. She is an authentic professional. She shows up the way she wants to, and she still carries on all her duties. She makes sure she takes care of herself. Like, to me, just having her as a mentor has definitely made me learn that I can be a professional. I can show up the way I want to, despite what other people may think of me.
That's so powerful, talking about that authenticity. And I
Yeah.
think that's like a tool a little bit. And I feel like I may have spoken to y'all about this before, but I feel like it's a tool to kind of gauge where you want to be. So as folks are graduating and looking for jobs, if you're displaying yourself authentically, of course, like in interviews, you know, you're trying to continue to put your best foot forward and everything. But as long as you have a little piece of that authenticity, if people are reacting negatively to that, that helps you know, ooh, okay, maybe this isn't a place that I want to be, because you're
Yeah.
not going to appreciate me as I show up and as I want to show up in this space. So I think it's powerful.
And I really appreciate that you say that, because I've been telling like a lot of my coworkers and a lot of other people that work in different departments like Central. I think most of us are very fortunate if we have a job on campus. This may just be speaking from my own experience. Everyone has their own experiences, but I know that with my coworkers at CLCE, a lot of us have expressed that gratitude that we can show up professionally and we can find that support within our student involvement staff, more specifically those that work in our office. So shout out to Amber, Andre, Liz, and everyone before us, because y'all did it for us.
And so, Michael, you mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to talk more about creating professional relationships and also what it means by setting boundaries with those professional relationships. Because I know it can be kind of challenging if, say, you have friends in a club that you're part of in a club and you get put into a leadership position, kind of managing that relationship of like, hey, we're still friends, we're still close, we still hang out, but we're gonna have to act a little differently now moving forward when it comes to being a professional.
Yeah, that's a really, really good topic, and one that's pretty near and dear to my experience myself. So as I mentioned before, going to become a graduate assistant, I stayed at the same institution I did my undergrad in. So that means I had friends who are not graduated yet, who are still on campus and still living that undergrad experience. So then moving into this position, and I had very explicit conversations with my professional staff that I was working with in the office about how we show up and what those boundaries are, both from a, hey, you're trying to work as a professional standpoint, but also from a legal standpoint, because for us in the education realm, you're going to have some constraints to what you have to report if you see something. And so there are some things that are going to be mandated that you're reporting. And so that puts you into a space where you're like, I just witnessed something, or you just disclosed something to me as a representative of the university. I have to pass this along.
Yeah.
And it also puts your friends in a weird position, because if you're, you know, say at a party or something like that, and you see something, maybe you've told your close friends that, but you haven't told the broader friend group, and you see something, now all of a sudden you have to report that. And so I think number one, and this is something that I did, it was having that conversation and saying explicitly, our relationship is going to change a little bit. It's going to change a little bit. I still we're still cool. I still want to be friends with you. I still want to hang out with you. But these are the parameters in which I have to operate based on my professional position. And I think starting there is the big piece, because you help to manage and you help to get your friends to see and your peers to see, hey, this is where I'm coming from, but you're also bringing them along at the front end. It's not just a hard cutoff. Oh, you know, Michael's not coming to my invites for going out or going to the party, or he's not responding to me or whatever. You help to walk them through that transition. And I think it's very, very important to do that, because in a lot of instances, especially even now, actually, and I want to kind of get y'all's take on this too, being a student employee, a lot of the things that you're doing, especially in an office like the CLCE that has to do with leadership, you all kind of end up being in these positions. I mean, even the podcast where people are seeing you, they're seeing you as these mentors, or seeing you as these leaders on campus. And so in front of your peers, you have to kind of start managing some things, you know, maybe not being fall down drunk on a Saturday night in town because you might be working with a student who has just joined CLCE and now they're seeing you in this sort of way, especially for us as professionals to try. I personally make it a point to not be in any space that students are going to be partying. And that's for sure in a house setting, but also when it comes to certain places downtown. I know that there's some spots that are more of the go-to hangout spots outside of pandemic times. And I have chosen for myself to avoid those areas because for me, that's where my line of professionalism is. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the same for other professionals on campus. There may be some other folks who manage that in a different way than I do. But that's part of how you have to really sit back and think to yourself, how do I want to present? How do I want to show up? And what situations do I not want to be in? So I can avoid, hey, this is a very awkward interaction right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you saying that, that just reminds me of when Aurelia and I were actually ELP leaders. For those who don't know, Experienced Leadership Project, we were student leaders, but it was kind of similar to like a counselor kind of role. And so just having that, establishing that professional relationship with our students, you know, during that 4-day period, you know, it was impactful. And then coming back to campus, you know, I didn't really want that to change. So, and working at the CLCE, we are involved a lot in leadership workshop, leadership discussions. We do the Wildcat Leadership Institute. So we see students all the time that have this image of us as student leaders on campus. So going out to, say, the bars or going out to a house party, you are still, even though you're off the clock, you're still representing, I'm still representing the CLCE. So I think it's my duty as a student worker to also maintain that level of professionalism and not, you know, go crazy or do something that I shouldn't. What do you think, Aurelia?
I would completely agree. Even though we want to show up in those spaces and do whatever we want, like with our friends or whatever, but we do have that instance where we have those other individuals that see us in these higher roles or just in these roles, leadership roles in general, not specifically higher, but it is a little bit more challenging. But something that comes up to mind is just maintaining that, like setting the boundaries for myself in a way that kind of, it's more of a personal and like mental boundary rather than I'm not going to go to this space. I'm not going to go here. I'm not going to, because for me, I show up where my students need me to show up just because, like, I remember there's this instance when I had a ELPer message me saying, hey, I'm not feeling well. Can you walk me to campus, the SMAC? And so I did that. And even though I was like, I don't know if my job title really says that, but I was like, I'm kind of showing up in a professional manner as a leader, as her mentor, as their friend. So I still maintain that level of professionalism, but at the same time, it was kind of like an instance where I was unsure, but my morals and my professionalism were still able to kind of like intertwine or intersect in a way. But yeah, that's kind of my personal take. It's a little bit more challenging for that role shift, especially being like coming into the CLCE, no leadership experience, really not having a title. It's just a little more challenging, but it's not impossible. It just takes a lot of adapting and a lot of, I would say, a lot more personal reflection of what you would want yourself to be as a professional or seen as a professional.
Can I ask, how have your ideas of personal professionalism shifted after joining the CLCE and working with other student professionals in this office?
Well, I mean, for me, just showing up for like these professional settings, it was more like I've always just been the type of person where I have these leadership roles, but they're not like extensively exclusive to like a title. Like I don't really have to make, I've always just kind of been a goody two shoes. I don't really gotta say nothing, do nothing because I don't do anything wrong type of vibe going on or whatever. But in terms of like your question, I would just say for me as a woman of color, showing up in a space where I can actually speak up and being able to make my presence known is a way that my professionalism has shifted, or my view of professionalism, because beforehand I was just kind of more meek, quiet, again, not saying anything to disrupt the business or whatever. But now that I've worked with my peers and I've gotten a lot of encouragement and a lot of guidance from peers and mentors, it's definitely shifted in a way where I am more empowered in my professionalism, and I'm more likely to show up as myself rather than just kind of shut down and do whatever I'm supposed to be doing by society's standards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say for myself, kind of as what I learned is honestly just having the mere confidence of showing up as a professional, because going into the CLCE, I didn't really necessarily was understand all of these leadership and personal development skills and stuff like that. That's something I had to learn over time. And then I got comfortable putting myself out there and being comfortable leading students, because I now understood from learning from people such as Andre, people like former CLC workers Joanne and Kim, and that kind of helped shape me to understand how I should present myself and how I should show up.
I feel like you hit a really good point there in terms of when you're showing up in a space, and you mentioned the CLCE staff, there's a lot of stuff that they're probably doing explicitly to kind of coach you all in terms of student employees, but you're also just implicitly observing how they, as professionals in their role, interact. And I think that that's very important, because you showing up in that space for a new CLCE employee who comes in, or after you have graduated and you've gone into a professional position, other folks are going to be kind of looking at you and taking note of, hey, this is how a professional interacts. And that's something to be aware of.
That note also makes me a little nervous. I'm not gonna lie. Don't like it when people just looking, but we're gonna roll through with it. Just really quickly, something that I really wanted to talk about in terms of like professional management, just so the Wildcats know a little bit more about your role and like how you've helped students in the past. How's your personal philosophy kind of helped students gain access to certain professional development, or like just workshops, travel, whatever, just to make sure that all our students have the opportunity to grow as a professional?
Yeah. So the club experience, kind of as I touched on a little bit with my background, is very important to me. And that has shaped part of the reason why I have sought out position like this one. So for folks who don't know, as a student engagement coordinator, my role is to support, help coordinate, and optimize essentially all things related to clubs here at Central. So a lot of the work that we have done over the last 2 years has really been foundational in terms of, hey, these systems may not have been working the best way in order for me to understand how I can put on a large scale event or a small scale event, or how I can rent equipment, or how I can request funding and get that approved in a way that I can coordinate this travel experience that's going to be meaningful to my club members or meaningful to CWU as a whole. So when it comes into the club experience and thinking about student development, there's a huge array of different avenues. And right now where we're at Central is, let's make sure that folks understand the structures so they can do the things that they want to do. And then the next step is to take students and say, okay, this is your experience so far. These are the things that you've already been doing. You've been doing volunteer opportunities. You may not know it, but you've been mentoring new members as an officer. You have been coordinating your entire club. You're essentially running your little, like a small business. It's in and of itself. You've been putting in funding requests for thousands and thousands of dollars and managing those budgets. The next step is, how do we optimize those things that you're already doing so that we can say, over the course of your 4 years or 5 years being here, you have done X, Y, and Z. This is how you have developed. This is how it impacts the career that you're applying for. And then we take very specific instances and very specific experiences within that tenure of a student, and we say, can we focus this? So can we focus leadership, Or can we focus community engagement, but from a music standpoint, if I'm a music club? Can we focus that from a anime club standpoint? Can we focus that from an overarching academic standpoint? And that's where we're headed. And that's where I'm very, very excited, because you can take essentially any experience that a student is having within this world, and you can make a case for all of the work that they're putting in that has directly been going back into their own skill development. And so we're trying to quantify that. And being able to quantify that, we're in the process of putting this together with our technology presence that you all have interacted with before. Getting this side of the system online, it's going to allow students to, at the end of their time here at Central, literally print out a document that says, these are my experiences. This is what this has meant. This is what CWU has said these experiences meant, whether it's leadership, whether it's a international and cultural competency. There's just so much. So I don't know if I answered that question, but I'm very, very excited about that.
I think you definitely did. And then just talking about that personally, my experience with Present, just from a student leader, like also working on campus, trying to navigate that, has not been the best. But knowing that that's the purpose, I'm a little bit more excited for the future Wildcats that get to use it, because personally, I would have loved to use that. I'm graduating in spring, fortunately, but unfortunately. I'm just really excited to see, and I really hope that students and like Wildcats that are listening to this do take advantage of those experiences, because they are very meaningful. And if y'all have any experiences you want to enjoy, I would really recommend setting up a meeting with Michael. He's great. Gone to him several times for a lot of help. So definitely hit him up for that.
Please do. My door is always open. And I do want to speak to that in terms of presence as a system. I've said this before, and Amber and I joke about this all the time, but we are in the process of building a plane while we're flying it. So there are functionalities of that system that aren't even turned on and accessible to you all yet. So I do appreciate the patience, but I also want to honor what you're saying about your user experience, because it is not all together yet. And that's something that we're trying to make sure is fully put together for the future Wildcats.
We love hearing that.
Thank you. Right there. So, Michael, as we all know, current situation, being a student and also being a professional in the career is difficult at times, because a lot of the things that we're doing is remote. Just managing your time at home and trying to do work and then switch gears and to do homework, it's very difficult. And I think one thing that for students, even as working professionals, adaptability has been something that has been very important into keeping us able to keep on doing what we're supposed to be doing. How has that impacted you recently?
Yeah, so personally, I would say that self-care is a part of professionalism. And there's definitely layers to self-care. But one thing that is, I think, on the forefront of that is being able to be respectful of your time and to manage your time. And so for me, showing up in a remote space is really setting the structure of how my day is going to go, because there's a ton of stuff, y'all. There's a ton of stuff that needs to get done and will continue to need to get done. I could be working all the way through 10 p.m. starting at 8 in the morning. But I try not to do that, because I have established areas of, at this time, this chunk of time to this chunk of time, this is what we're working on. At this chunk of time to this chunk of time, this is where meetings are happening. And because of those meetings, we're going to set up another workspace to knock down the to-do list. And then from this point to this point, I'm making dinner and we're eating, and me and my partner are watching Netflix, and we're not doing anything work related, whether it's CWU work, whether it's Jacks of all work, whatever it is. And so first and foremost, being able to establish what is it that works for you. If you're somebody who has I need to get my to-do list done or I'm not going to relax, okay, then you're going to want to front load and prioritize, how do I accomplish these things bit by bit in order to make sure I do have time to relax and not start feeling the struggles with burnout. And that's something that I think we all deal with. That's something that I deal with myself. As a student, it's a very similar thing. because your classes, from what I understand, talking to some of you all, other students and clubs, they can be a wide range of you're either meeting in person, you're not meeting in person, but you have scheduled lectures, you don't have scheduled lectures, that's kind of a teach yourself sort of deal. And because you're mixing and matching all of these things, you kind of have to have more autonomy over, this is when I'm focusing on school. And after this point in time, I'm going to be dealing with work stuff. And you can have some overlap and stuff like that. But if you don't do that, I have found for myself that I just get into this perpetual rut / cycle of, oh, I can do this now. If I do this here, and then all of a sudden it's 11 p.m., I haven't eaten dinner, I'm hangry, I haven't worked out, and all of these things that go into keeping us functioning optimally, because that running yourself like that's not sustainable. And then what that does is it makes you run into the ground. It makes it harder to get sleep. It makes it harder to show up and be present in the moment when you're dealing with work stuff. And it directly impacts how you're presenting as a professional. So you got to make sure you're taking care of that, your personal self, as well as getting your to-do list items done.
I really wish you had told me that my sophomore, junior year, because I was running myself to the ground. But we're here now, we managed. All right, so this is going to be the last question that I have for you, Michael. It's been great having you. I really appreciate this conversation, and hopefully we can have more of these conversations in the office. I'm really looking forward to that.
Sure.
Yes, please.
But is there any piece of advice that you would be giving either current Wildcats or future Wildcats?
Overall, specifically in professionalism, or?
Whatever you think they need to hear.
Okay. My biggest piece of advice, and this is going to be kind of broad, so if y'all don't like conceptual stuff, I apologize, but it is try to learn to be comfortable with taking risks, putting yourself out there, and failing. Because failing and failure is a necessary prerequisite to success. You have to try. You're not going to get the outcome that you want a lot of times, but each one of those experiences are going to go into when you finally hit that point that you're looking for, whether that's getting an internship, whether that's getting a better grade in a class, whether that is applying for a new job after school. Getting comfortable being able to take a chance and try something. And that's joining a club, that's applying for a student employment opportunity, that's volunteering. You really never know what doors those things are going to get, or what doors those are going to open for you all. And so any way that you can, try and get involved, take those risks, allow yourself to fail, and the grace to fail. It's not just, oh, I failed, and now I'm beating myself up over it. It's, okay, this happened. What did I learn from it? How can I move forward from here? And I think that's going to carry you all so far.
That was very powerful. And I really appreciate you saying that. Again, where was this advice when I was a freshman, Michael?
Hey, make sure you still apply that now, though, Aurelie. That's what I just got from that. To continue to try, lift yourself back up, and, So once again, Michael, thank you so much for joining this podcast, and thank you to you, Wildcat, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode and you want to hear more, you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or YouTube at Word to the Wildcat.
If you're interested in any other amazing programs that the CLCE has to offer, check out our website at cwu.presence.io and follow our social media pages.
Also, Wildcats, remember that you can receive credit towards earning your Wildcat Leadership Academy certificate by simply just doing a quick assessment of what you learned from this episode. And you can learn more about that at the website Aurelie mentioned. And once again, thank you for joining us. Please join us again next time. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Aurelie, and this has been Word to the Wildcat.